Welcome to Polaris-Live. This is Sarwar Kashmeri welcoming our viewers from around the world to this series of programs on the United States and China in the world. This program is brought to you live in conjunction with the Foreign Policy Association of New York. I'd like to remind our viewers that you can ask questions throughout this program using the comment button on the right-hand side of the screen. Time permitting, we will get to as many of them as we possibly can. My guest today is Professor Michele Geraci, who joins us from Rome, Italy. Professor Michele Geraci is head of the China Economic Policy Program at Nottingham University Business School, head of China at the Global Policy Institute, as well as senior research fellow and adjunct professor of finance at Zhejiang University. He's been living in China since 2008. Professor Geraci was former Undersecretary of State at the Italian Ministry of Economic Development, responsible for international trade and investment. He played a key role in structuring Italy's Belt and Road Memorandum of Understanding between China and Italy. It gives me great pleasure to invite Professor Geraci. Welcome, Professor Geraci. Geraci, sorry.
Hello, good morning to you. Happy to be seeing you again.
Thank you. Well, it's happy to have you on again, Michele. So, listen, we have a lot to ask you. So I'm going to get into this program right away. You have used the phrase sanctions washing to describe as largely ineffective the US-led sanctions by the West on China and Russia for Russia's war in Ukraine. What do you mean by that phrase, Michele?
The phrase sanction washing is borrowed from the maybe more well-known greenwashing. Many companies say they do green activity to be perceived as being socially responsible, given that, of course, green is one of the hot topics and also one of the criteria on which companies, management, government, politicians are rewarded and judged. So this sanction washing is similar to that concept. Things that are not really useful, they really do not have any impact, but they're just done to be seen as doing them. So companies close maybe a store in Russia, which of course doesn't hurt in any way the economy of Russia. Politicians announce embargo on certain goods, and we can discuss the details. When we look at the numbers, it will be maybe clear why these are just washing. And so they really do not help the peace process, or they do not help stop the war. They're just there so that politicians are perceived by the electoral basis to be doing something. This something, however, and this unfortunately when the analysis steps in, is that the desire and the wishes to make those sanctions be effective is not aligned with the reality of what the analysis and the economic analysis tell us. And that's why I define them with this name, sanction washing, so that people in a way clear up their own conscience. They say, we have done it, move on.
But so do you think that this, the climb of the ruble back to what it was pre-Ukraine invasion is part of what you're describing as sanctions washing? Because, the Russian currency had collapsed, but today the ruble seems to be back where it was before. Is that part of the formula that you're talking about?
It's one of those. Like if we thought that we could impose sanctions on Russia, and the effect of the sanction, if it had been to make the currency weaker, then yes, the rebound of the rubles does not support the idea that those sanctions are working. But there's more than that. I take the example of the most recent round of sanctions that the European Union has placed on Russia, which is embargo of imports of coal from Russia. There is a general belief, mistaken belief, that the Russian economy relies a lot on export of certain commodities, for example, gas and coal. And so politicians have been led to believe that if they were to put sanctions on imports of those commodities, then the Russian economy would be on its knees. I'm using the words that they've been saying. So, coal, EU Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen has said, these are her own words, coal is an important source of income, of revenue for the Russian economy. This is false. Coal represents 0.2% of the overall Russian GDP. So it's about 4 billion dollars, $4 billion of value of coal that Russia sells to the European Union. Now, 4 billion out of an economy of 1.6 trillion US dollar is nothing, 0.2 percentage of the GDP. So not only if we buy or not coal from Russia, it really makes zero difference for their economy. It certainly does not put the Russian economy on its knees. But the more worrying thing is the narrative that we are using in Europe by stating, in a way, I would say, false claims, or maybe in good faith, mixing desires with the reality. Announcing that coal is an important source of revenue for Russia is not just wrong, but it gives our population the impression, wrong impression, that we are actually doing something, that has an impact, and it hasn't.
All that
And
thought makes
so this creates also a problem, because when the population sees that sanctions are not working,
yes.
they would not be working on these amounts, the population would question the activity of our own governments. So really, using this narrative, emphatically saying we are putting lots of pressure on the Russian economy, and then this thing do not materialize, also makes the European government lose the confidence of their electoral basis. So in a way,
So
they're shooting themselves in the foot.
I wanted to interject here because in the U.S. Uh, there is also the feeling that the sanctions are indeed working, and this has brought America and Europe closer together. As you know, America is suffering from a lot of price increases, gasoline, energy, and so on. So, what you're saying also then suggests that the impression Americans have of what's taking place there, how we are dealing with Russia, may not be as accurate as we are reading.
Indeed. In fact, for 2 months almost, we have been threatening sanctions on those imports of goods. And threatening those sanctions actually has the perverse effect of making commodity prices also go up, because there will be some supply glut, etc. And so, of course, gas and oil have increased even before the war, but this threat of putting further sanctions does help price movement up. So in a way, not only the sanctions are not working, but they're totally counterproductive, because higher prices means more money going into Russia. So if I may say, it is almost as if announcing sanction finances the war.
Wow. It's. I should have also mentioned that Canada is a very big part of the North American response, and the Canadian finance minister not long ago became the first G7 minister, if I remember correctly, to strike Russia off the most favored nation status, saying that this is exactly what should be done. So all around this coalition may be on very weak ground, which is a very scary thought, but we are not hearing that. So I appreciate your bringing this out.
No, I share the concern that you raised, and to the American listeners, yes, the thing that I have seen, or the thing I have not seen, is the lack of cost benefit analysis, impact analysis. It is not just enough to say we block imports from Russia and it will hurt their economy. These things are complicated. Modeling the effect or the interruption of trade in between nations. You mentioned MFN clause that Canada has suspended with Russia, so they could impose tariff in a different discriminatory way than Canada would do with other countries. It is not something you do lightly. You do lightly if it is sanction washing. If it is the finance minister just wants to announce to the Canadian population that they are hurting Russia. But have they done the analysis to see how much Russia would be hurt, how much Canada would be hurt? And the more important question that really has not been answered is whatever we hurt Russia by, let's assume we already know the number, the impact on their economy. Is that an agent of change in Russia campaign in Ukraine? Because our objective is not to hurt the Russian economy per se. The objective of sanctions should be to stop the war. And if an economic weakness in Russia were to be an agent of peace, then yes, we could go along that route. But we don't know how big this of an impact it would be. We don't know if this impact would be an agent of change in the view that Putin has. And of course, we also we are in a way accusing Russia of wanting to recreate the empire, picking up a fight against the Western world of liberal democracies and so on. So we actually uh, maybe assigning to this war a meaning that is
Yes.
very important, very important. We think we are under attack. So, but this is internally inconsistent because the more we put importance on this war, the more we say Putin is doing this because he wants to conquer Europe with his view, the less is going to be 1 or 2% of GDP going to make Putin change his mind.
So, Michele, forgive me for asking a question that I don't
Yes, any
believe
questions
is.
are okay.
No, but this is, I say forgive me because this question I think is very important, but is not being asked. And the question is, do you think that this war could have been prevented? Is this a major breakdown of democracy? I'm sorry, of diplomacy in America, the EU, and Russia? I mean, do you think we might have been more sensitive, for example, to Russia's security needs, or do you think that Mr. Putin just had to go and destroy or take over or whatever Ukraine? I'm not certain there is an answer to this question, but do you think somewhere something could have been done to avoid this war?
Of course, the responsibility of the military attack lies entirely with Russia. That goes without saying, but these days we need to also state the obvious. However, while we do not justify war, we analysts also analyze the reasons and the causes. And when we come to understand and look at what has caused this reaction from Russia, then we do have to admit that the West has its own, has in a way underplayed the risk of this war and is co-responsible for what is happening. Politically, the European Union, the West in general, is also responsible for this. Is responsible for not having engaged with Russia, ignored Russia worries, maybe overplayed by Putin, maybe not, maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong. He feels encircled. And again, we may share or may not share the view, but he has been shouting at us for the last 10 years about these things, and we have ignored his calls. Now, the moment that Ukraine suggest that they could join NATO, this is a trigger for war, of course, because Putin knows that if that were to happen, he could not attack the NATO country anymore. So he was, in a way, cornered into having to do something before this intention on Ukraine's side to join NATO were to become a reality. So, in a way, we and Ukraine, that are the victim of the military invasions, are also politically responsible for what they have declared they would do to join the other side. And now, some people say, well, any country can do what they like. If they want to join NATO, they can. If they don't, this is completely not true. We have to be clear. Countries are not free to join or leave NATO. France cannot tomorrow leave NATO. It's not possible. And so we don't have to play with, we don't have to kid ourselves. We don't need to pretend that countries are really free to do what they want. International politics is not based on law. It's based on the law of the strongest. In this case, the superpowers, China, US, Europe, Middle East when it comes to gas and so on. So there is no law. It's the law of the jungle, the law of the stronger. So countries are not free to do what they want. They're free to do what they want if that does not impact or infringe on the interests of other countries. And when that infringement happens, the stronger steps in.
So you mentioned China, and so I would like to now tangent pivot a little bit to China in the equation. The point is being made by the West, led by the US, that if China really wants to assume world leadership as a responsible stakeholder, quote unquote, then it is really dismaying its supporters and not building its qualifications for world leadership by not condemning Russia in the same way that the West has. Your thoughts on that?
China does not do washing, sanction washing, does not do statement washing. So China does not need to prove to anyone that they do things to be perceived. China is much more pragmatical. China knows that if you want to be a mediator in a conflict, you must not take sides. So the moment that China were to openly and loudly, vocally condemn Russia, Putin, it would lose its neutrality status. And with it, it would lose the chance to be playing a positive role to, broker peace between those two countries. So, what do we want, peace or war? If we want peace, we should not criticize China for taking this neutral position, for not condemning Russia. We should actually encourage China to remain neutral. We should encourage China not to take side because we, assuming we really want peace, and we are really not playing with the lives of innocent Ukrainians for other interests. So assuming that we do really want a peace in Ukraine, then we should support China neutrality status because this is an agent of peace. For me, it's very linear and simple. Anyone who asks China to take sides wants the war to go on.
Well, you couldn't ask for a more frank response. I appreciate that, but I'm going to extend that a little bit. And this I'm doing because the fact of the matter is that populations in that a large number of countries, including with China, including South Africa, India, UAE, other Middle Eastern countries that are supposedly strong allies of the US, they have also stood on the sidelines and either totally rejected supporting or abstained from it. So, do you think a larger picture is emerging here, Michele, of the world order that everybody talks about, moving in a certain direction? Do you think that there is a lesson from the fact that a large number of countries are not supporting the Western position on Russia?
There is this consideration to be made because 20, 30 years ago, when the world economy was Western dominated in terms of size, then Western sanctions were important because they were isolating the minority of the rest of the world. Today, in terms of population, of course, the Western world only counts for a very slim minority. 14% of the world population belongs to the countries that have today placed sanctions on Russia. The remaining, I call it the remaining, 86% of the world population lives in countries that they have not put sanctions. Now, on economic terms, the situation is not so skewed. Western represents, I go around 60% of the world GDP. The remaining countries represent 40% of GDP, so a little bit less than half and half. But we're talking about 50 countries imposing sanctions and 150 not imposing countries. And within these 150, we have a rising economy, like you mentioned, China, India, and so on, who, of course, are not isolated. It is us, the Western world, who is now becoming isolated with this imposing sanction, while the rest of the world keeps on doing business as usual, and not just with Russia, but even with each other. So we are, in a way, forging or succeeding in doing the miracle of getting countries like China and India and Pakistan, closer to each other than they were before, because they do belong now to a group of countries that maybe they see Ukraine as a big problem, but distant, just like for us in the West. The war in Yemen or in Sudan or in other parts of Asia is a distant thing for which we really rarely impose this kind of sanctions, because we have to be honest. There is a bit of racism in putting sanctions because it's in Europe. Maybe being white deserves more sanction than if someone else is victim of aggression in Africa, for example. So geography does play a role. So these other countries have stronger economic ties with each other, and they decided that they continue to do business. And yes, look with worry at what's happening in Ukraine, but it's not. It's not, Indian President Modi's main thought in the morning, and no, neither is President Xi Jinping. Although they are worried because they all want stability. Now, situation, as we have seen in Pakistan just hours ago, seems to be evolving in a situation where this alliance may actually find obstacles in the way. So things they're not going to be smooth for this other group of countries, because we have also internal turmoils, and maybe these are not entirely unrelated.
So, two questions as we run to the end of our program, Michele. One having to do with the EU, actually. I am amongst the people who thinks the founding of the European Union was a seminal geopolitical event of the last century, and I've always thought that that was a first-class piece of diplomacy on the part of Europeans. Lately, the media is saying that the EU, has never been as cohesive as it has been against the Russian war in Ukraine. If all the things that you have just said were cranked into the analysis, it seemed to me that in the long term, the opposite could also happen, that the cohesion of the EU might weaken. Do you agree with that, or am I totally cold?
No, I agree with you that the EU has indeed shown cohesion, and the media is right in saying the EU has had a united response. What the media does not say is what I told you at the beginning of of our discussion, is that this unity is useless. It's washing. It's unity washing. They are united, the 27 countries, because they're not doing anything of any impact. So it's easy to agree on some fluff. So it is true. There is unity, but it's a unity of no use. Now, when we go beyond the surface and we look, we actually have discrepancies. We have Italy and Germany who do not want to impose sanctions on Russian gas, for example, because we rely on that heavily. France doesn't, so France is a bit more relaxed. But Macron has other things to worry about for the next 2 weeks. Hungary and Orban are taking a little bit of a cautious approach to Ukraine. Even Zelensky and Miss von der Leyen met in Kiev a couple of days ago. If you saw the video, it's very interesting. Von der Leyen went to Zelensky and said, "Nice to see you again after how long was it? When did we last meet? A year ago." And Zelensky said, "Really? Maybe I don't remember." Now, you don't say, "I don't remember," to a head of another, not head of state, but to a representative of the European Union, if the relationship between EU and Ukraine were also good. Because
Wow.
the relationship between EU and Ukraine are not good. This is another thing that the media may not portray correctly, because Zelensky is asking for help, practical help, that the EU is not offering because the EU is doing sanction washing.
Yes. It's well, wow. I mean, so much to pack, and along what you've just said, Ukraine is asking for another 26 billion. We talked about that earlier in the program. So, if you were to offer an advice, and let's end on a positive note, if you
Mhm.
were to offer some advice on stopping this destruction of thousands of poor Ukrainians and so on, you know, take a shot at it. What would you say, Michele?
You go. It's very easy. You have to talk to Putin, not to Zelensky, and both of them, of course. But we only talk to the Ukrainian side for now because we have taken side. So we need a neutral partner that puts the two guys together and basically agrees on what we have been saying, what I have been saying for the last 2 months. It is unfortunate. Donetsk, Lugansk region should be independent. The Russian, Russian people live there, or people with Russian culture. So you should separate them from Ukraine, and that is what Putin wants. He wants a country that acts as a barrier between Russia and, let's say, the western part of Ukraine, who would then be free to do what they want. They can be
Mm,
joining the European Union and so on, and have a safety belt,
yes.
territorial safety belt. This is what Putin would like to have. Unfortunately, I think this is what's going to happen, and the longer it takes, the more people will die for nothing, because the end game is going to be, in my view, exactly what the beginning game was 2 months ago. So we need to maybe accept, as I said, international relationship is not based on the right of law. It's based on the right of the strongest, and we know that we do these things all over the world, including the West. And some countries are in a geographic position that does not grant them 100% freedom of what they want to do. This is when countries say they need to be in the middle.
Well, Michele Geraci, we have unfortunately run out of time. We've unpacked a lot of
Okay.
things. You've been very forthright. And of course, it goes without saying that you're always welcome on Polaris Live. But let me take this opportunity on behalf of all our viewers from around the world to thank you very, very much for your forthright remarks and for being on Polaris Live.
Okay, it was a pleasure. Nice talking to you.
Nice talking to you too. And with that, let me just tell our viewers, thank you so much for watching. This has been Polaris Live with Michele Geraci from Rome, Italy. And as you know, we have been making our name in Polaris Live by presenting forthright conversations without fear or fervor. So on behalf of Polaris Live, thank you for watching. I hope we'll see you again at the next episode. Until then, goodbye.